The doctors told me she wouldn't survive. That sentence still echoes in my mind to this day. It was all I could hear while 3 doctors exchanged grave looks in front of me. In that cold room, my world began to fall apart. But then he walked in and said that would be the beginning of the impossible. The smell of disinfectant was still stuck in my nostrils, that sterile, metallic scent that seemed determined to erase any trace of humanity. I remembered the coldness of the porcelain floor beneath my feet, even with closed shoes. We were sitting there, in that windowless room, where the white light was too cruel for the eyes and for the heart. 3 doctors, all with closed expressions, as if time itself had stopped to listen to what they were about to say. None of them moved. None of them looked directly at me. The ticking clock was the only sound brave enough to break the silence. Tick-tock, tick-tock, until one of them finally took a deep breath. Prepare yourself. She's not going to make it. Those words cut deeper than any knife. I felt my hands trembling. My fingertips tingled as if life itself wanted to abandon me at that moment too. My throat closed, and still, the tears began to fall. Silent and relentless, as if my whole body was trying to understand what my mind refused to accept. My daughter, my only daughter, lying in a hospital bed, connected to wires, tubes, monitors, and the men in white coats, who were supposed to be the hope, were there telling me it was time to let go, that there was nothing more to be done. She suffered severe brain damage. Her heart is still beating, but it's a mechanical response. The body is here, but she, the person you know, she may already be gone. I couldn't respond. My mouth was dry, as if the words had fled as well. My chest weighed like stone. I tried to stand, but my legs hesitated, so I sat right there, on the edge of the chair, eyes fixed on nothing, mentally replaying every memory I had of my little girl. Her first cry, her first step, the first time she called me Mom, and now, all of it about to become the past. The doctor's voice continued in the background, saying things that sounded like bureaucracy in the face of a death sentence. We'll keep her under observation for another 48 hours, but if there's no response by then, we'll need to discuss removing the supports. They didn't know what they were saying. They didn't know my daughter. They hadn't seen the strength in her eyes, even as a child. They hadn't watched her face the world with a courage I often envied. In that room, no one but me knew the heart that beat inside that body. I stood with difficulty, took a deep breath, trying to find some part of myself that still knew how to carry on, and I went to her, walked to the ICU with heavy steps, each one marked by fear. I passed through the glass door, which opened with a mechanical whisper, as if the hospital itself was mourning. There she was, fragile, almost unrecognizable, but she was my daughter, my greatest love. I sat beside her, held her hand, and the cold of her skin pierced through me like ice. I leaned over her head and whispered, voice choked, "If you can hear me, fight. Please, my love, fight." And there, in that room muffled by the rhythmic sound of machines, something inside me broke. It wasn't just fear. It was also the memory of everything we had already overcome. The sleepless nights, the promises we made, the fights, the makeups. A whole life compressed into seconds, and no word I said could bring her back. At that moment, it felt like the world had collapsed in an instant. But what I didn't know yet, what no one in that hospital knew, was that the impossible was about to happen. The most striking sound in that ICU wasn't the people. It wasn't the muffled voices of hurried doctors or the soft whispers of rotating shifts. It was the constant, impassive beeping of the heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. That mechanical, repetitive sound became the soundtrack of my waiting. Each beat wasn't just a sign of life. It was a hammering blow to my nerves, a cruel reminder that my daughter was still there, but so distant she felt unreachable. The door opened with a faint hiss. I walked in alone that morning. The shiny white floor reflected the cold brightness of the lights, and for a moment, I felt like I was crossing a frozen temple, a place where time had stopped, where prayers were whispered, and faith trembled along with the knees. My eyes scanned the beds, but nothing could prepare me to see her. My girl, motionless, surrounded by tubes, wires, machines, her face pale, almost translucent under the lights. There were flowers in the glass panel beside her, placed there by someone from the hospital, perhaps trying to humanize the setting, but there was no fragrance. Only the smell of disinfectant, the echo of footsteps, and that sound. Beep, beep, beep. I sat down slowly, trying to hold back the nausea rising in my throat. My hand trembled as I held hers. So small, so cold. Even though I knew she was a young woman now, to me, she was still the little girl who clung to me when thunder scared her. And me? I was the mother who promised to protect her from everything. But how do you protect someone from the fragility of their own body? I leaned close to her ear. My voice barely came out, but I had to speak. If you can hear me, fight. Fight like you always have. I'm here, my love. You're not alone. Silence answered, a thick silence that felt heavy. In that room, words were afraid to be born, and everything felt more cruel because of it, because the world outside that room kept turning, merciless, without pause for anyone's pain. I stayed silent for a while, eyes fixed on her. And then came the flashes. Little fragments of her childhood flooded my mind. The first time she laughed out loud. The awkward dance she did in the middle of the living room at 4 years old, wearing my shirt like a princess dress. The scare when she fell off her bike, and the way she swallowed her tears just to say she was fine. Really fine, Mom. Always strong. Always resilient. And now, that girl woman was motionless, fighting, I hoped, in silence. It's terrible to look at someone you love and not be able to do anything, I murmured. It was like spitting out a truth that burned inside me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip out the tubes, shake her, tell her to wake up. But all I could do was be there, present, whole, even if shattered. The nurse came in silently, used to other people's pain. She changed the IV with automatic movements, checked the notes, and gave me a brief glance, the kind of look that carries compassion, but also distance. A look that says, I see your pain, but I can't carry it with you. And then she left. That's when the doctor arrived. The same one from the night before. Gray hair, tired face, eyes trained to look at mothers like me without breaking. He sat beside me, and after a few seconds said, as if he needed to prepare himself too, she remains stable. No improvement, no deterioration, but also no neurological response. We have a few more hours to observe, but if nothing changes, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. The rest of the sentence echoed clearly in my chest. If nothing changes, we'll turn off the machines. We'll give up on her. I looked at him with dry eyes, but my heart raw. You want me to authorize the end? He pressed his lips together. Maybe he hadn't expected such a direct question, but in that moment, I wasn't just a mother. I was the only one still believing in the impossible. I want you to be prepared, but no, I don't want anything, Mrs. Helena. I just don't want to prolong suffering. But what if it's not suffering? What if she's listening, trapped inside her own body? It's possible, he answered honestly, but it's unlikely. I closed my eyes. Faith is unlikely too, but I still have it. He nodded, not as a doctor, as a man, as someone who maybe also had a daughter at home. When he left, I held her hand again, ran my fingers through her hair, touched her forehead, and I stayed there for hours, whispering, praying, remembering, breathing for her, when it seemed even that was slipping away from her. And it was right there, between a prayer and a choked sob, that something changed. Not in the machines, not in the test results, but inside me. Because at that very moment, a memory from the past awakened. And I remembered someone I shouldn't have, someone who swore never to return. I don't know what was harder that night, keeping my eyes open or stopping my heart from bleeding in silence. The hours dragged on like centuries. Time seemed to mock my pain, stretching each second, testing my endurance. I remained seated beside my daughter's bed, holding her hand with the strength of someone trying to keep the world from collapsing. But even there, at the edge of the abyss, the past found a way to return. Because deep down, I knew it wasn't just her condition that was crushing me. There was another wound, one that had never fully healed. It began with a memory. A Sunday. She was little, maybe 6 or 7. We were lying on the couch, watching some cartoon. She was hugging me, and I was pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was falling apart. Because that morning, he had left. My husband, her father. He left without warning. No goodbye. Just a scribbled note and a half-packed suitcase in the corner of the room. I need to answer a higher calling. That's what it said. A calling. As if fatherhood was secondary. As if our family could be put on hold while he chased, what? Redemption? Faith? Something I still don't fully understand to this day. For a long time, I tried to justify his departure. I wanted to believe there was something noble behind the decision. That maybe he was lost. In crisis. But the days turned into months. The months into years. And no letter. No visit, not even a phone call. I raised my daughter alone, worked twice as hard, prayed every night that she'd never feel the void he left. And when she asked about him, I smiled with tear-filled eyes and made up stories. Daddy's on a trip, sweetheart. He sends kisses every day. He loves you, even from far away. Lies. A mother's lies to protect what little childhood her daughter had left. But now, sitting there at her bedside, seeing this young woman drifting between life and death, something in me cracked. An old anger, buried under years of survival, began to burn again. I didn't just want to save her. I wanted to understand why we had to suffer so much, why he abandoned us, and why, even after everything, some small corner of my heart still insisted on remembering him. The memories came in waves. The last argument, me holding the baby in my arms, begging him to stay. Him with that distant look in his eyes, talking about a divine mission, about purpose, about how God had called him to something greater, as if raising his own daughter wasn't sacred enough. You chose an idea over us, I whispered to the void. You chose the invisible and left behind what was real. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. The ICU air was dry, but inside me, the storm was alive. That's when something happened. A shift, a tension in the air. A nurse rushed by, carrying a folder. Another doctor appeared soon after, his face tense, eyes wide. Whispers started outside the glass door. Unusual movement. Something was different, but I had no idea what. I stood up, unsure. Opened the door. From the hallway, I could only see the backs of a few people walking away. Then, I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, firm. A sound I knew, but hadn't heard in years. I turned slowly, and there he was. Older, face weathered by time, graying beard, serious eyes, like someone who had walked a long road to get there. In his right hand, a Bible. In his left, nothing, as always. He never knew how to hold on to the consequences of what he let fall. For a second, I couldn't react. My body froze. It was like seeing a ghost walk through the doors of my pain. "You," was all I managed to say. He looked at me. Steady. His voice came out hoarse, but full of something that resembled regret. "I heard about the accident, and I came. As soon as I knew." I shook my head. A bitter laugh escaped, but quickly faded into silence. "You have no right to be here," I murmured. "You have no right to look at her now. After everything." He took a step. I took one back. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness, or to explain. I just want to see her. Just for a moment, please. The hallway seemed to pause. Nurses, doctors, everyone watched us with that kind of respectful discomfort. It was clear this wasn't just a visit. It was a reunion soaked in centuries of pain. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. I stood there, heart on fire, not knowing that in that moment, he was about to become part of a miracle no one dared to predict. The ICU door opened slowly, as if it felt the symbolic weight of that moment. I could hear every subtle creak of the mechanism, as if even the hospital's structure hesitated before what was about to happen. And when he took his first step inside, the air seemed thinner, heavier, as if time itself had held its breath along with me. He walked with slow, controlled steps, his body more hunched than I remembered, his beard now nearly all white. And his eyes, the eyes that once enchanted me for seeming determined and full of faith, they were different, deeper, tired, maybe even regretful, or maybe just worn out by time and the weight of all the absences he chose. In his right hand, he still held that worn-out Bible, its corners bent and frayed from use. It looked like his only baggage, and maybe it was. No suitcase, no flowers, no gift for the daughter he hadn't seen in so many years. Just that book, his shield, his map, his refuge, and perhaps now, his last hope. As he entered, all eyes turned to him. The nurses, who until then had been hurrying around, stopped. The doctors who had been reviewing test results in the corner went silent. It was impossible not to notice his presence, not because of any physical presence, but because of the tension his arrival stirred. And I could only stare. He approached our daughter's bed, as if stepping into a sanctuary, eyes fixed on her. No words, no sudden movements, just that slow walk, as if every step were a silent plea. He stopped at her side, looked down at her with almost religious reverence, and took a deep breath, a long sigh that seemed to carry within it all the years he had been gone. I watched him with my heart torn apart, not because he was there, but because part of me still wished he had come sooner, before the coma, before the tragedy, before everything that tore us apart. And now, standing there with his face lit by the cold glow of the ICU, he looked more like a stranger than the man I once dreamed of growing old with. He turned to me, his gaze uncertain, searching for something in my face that maybe not even I knew still existed. "She looks very different," he said at last, voice low, like he was afraid of waking her. "And what did you expect? That she'd be lying here with flowers in her hair, smiling at you?" The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't regret them. "You weren't there when she needed you, when she fell off her bike, when she had a high fever at 7, when she cried at school because the kids made fun of her name. You weren't there." He lowered his eyes, gripped the Bible tighter, yet still didn't respond right away. I know I failed, but I'm here now. I felt I had to come back. God brought me back. And if he brought me, it means this isn't the end yet." I shook my head, incredulous. "God? Now you want to use God as your excuse? Was it him who told you to abandon us? Him who told you to turn your back?" "No," he replied, still calm. "He called me, but I chose the path, and it was fear, not faith, that drove me away." Those words caught me off guard. For the first time, he admitted it wasn't blind obedience. It was escape, cowardice. And even if that didn't erase the scars, something in me recognized the truth in that confession. "You left me alone," I continued, my voice wavering between a cry and a whisper. "She only had you and me, and you disappeared, like we were burdens, like loving us was a weight you couldn't carry." He stepped closer to the head of the bed, gently touched our daughter's fingers with a tenderness I didn't expect. "I didn't know how to be a father," he confessed, voice choked. "But I want to at least try now. The tears I had fought so hard to hold back finally began to fall. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was just too much pain to contain. You can't just show up now and think a prayer will fix everything. He nodded. I don't expect to fix it, but if there's still time, maybe I can ask. Just one moment, a moment with her, from father to daughter. That's all. I stayed silent, eyes locked on that surreal image. The absent father, now begging for a second of connection, and my daughter, my girl, lying between us like a bridge of flesh and soul, still holding on to the chance for what once seemed impossible. I didn't say yes, but I didn't stop him either. I simply stepped back a few paces and let him kneel beside her. And it was there, in that gesture, that the next chapter of the story began to be written. The muffled sound of the respirators filled the room with an almost hypnotic rhythm. It was as if the entire hospital was breathing with her, each machine mimicking the fragility of life suspended between two worlds. He was still kneeling beside the bed, head bowed, fingers lightly grazing his daughter's hand. His prayer was silent now, or perhaps only internal. And I, leaning against the wall on the other side of the room, watched it all with a heart at war. There was something deeply infuriating about that scene. A man who left us so many years ago, now kneeling as if he had always belonged in that space, as if the same faith that took him from our lives now had the power to bring him back, without consequence, without explanation. The gesture was beautiful, maybe even sincere, but inside me, nothing was simple, nothing was clean. The pain had built up like old dust, crusted into the edges of my soul. I stepped forward. I couldn't stand the silence between us anymore. You really think you can just show up here, with that Bible under your arm, and pray like nothing ever happened? He stood up slowly. He moved more stiffly, bones creaking under the weight of time. He turned to me, without arrogance, but also without apology. Not yet. I didn't come to pretend nothing happened. I came because this might be my last chance to do something right. I laughed, a short, harsh laugh. Right? And what would be right now, huh? Thinking God's going to reward your absence with a miracle? That he'll give us our daughter back whole just because you decided to show up at the end of the story? You don't understand. No, you never understood. I cut in, stepping even closer. You left us when we needed you most. I had to be mother, father, wall, lap, shield, everything. And there was no one for me. None of your prayers made it here. He swallowed hard. I followed the call. I thought I was doing what was right. A call from who? God, or your own fear of facing real life, because true faith isn't running away. Faith is staying when everything falls apart. It's holding the hand of the one who's bleeding and not letting go. The words came out like blades. I didn't want to hurt him just to hurt him, but I had to say it. I needed to hear myself say it. All those years of silence were pouring out now, every drop turning into a verb. He stepped away from the bed, putting space between us and our daughter. He looked tired, defeated even. I prayed for you both every day, in every city, in every church, in every mission. I asked for protection, for light, but I knew I didn't deserve to come back. That maybe I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. My eyes filled with tears, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. It wasn't time to forgive. You disappeared. And I had to bury the woman I used to be just to get up every day. She called for you during her fevers, said your name in her sleep, and I pretended not to hear so I wouldn't fall apart in front of her. He let out a deep breath. I know, I was weak, a coward, but if there's still time, it's because God brought me back. And if he gave me this chance, maybe, just maybe, there's still something I can do. I stared at him for a long moment. There were no more screams left in me, just a different kind of silence now, heavier, more groan, a silence from someone who's already screamed too much and knows not all pain needs an echo. I looked at the bed. My daughter was still there, motionless, so beautiful and so fragile, like a seed sleeping beneath the earth, waiting for a sun that hasn't risen yet. She doesn't need promises, I whispered. She needs presence. He nodded, sincerely. Then let me be present, even if it's just for a moment. I took a deep breath. The hospital air felt heavier then, and even without saying yes, I didn't stop him. I let him approach again. He knelt once more, placed both hands over her chest, closed his eyes, and began to pray, this time out loud. A strong prayer, filled with pleading, with desperation, with repentance and faith, mixed like wine and blood. Lord, don't let the enemy win. Breathe life once more. Give her what I didn't know how to give. Presence, support, a future. Let my failures not be the end of her story. The words filled the room like a warm breeze amid the cold. I turned away, so I wouldn't see, so I wouldn't feel. But it was in that very moment that the machines began to sound different. First, a slight increase in her heart rate. Then, a new pattern in the vital signs. Doctors rushed in, alarmed. The whole team was called in. One of the machines let out a sound I hadn't heard before, and that alone made my heart leap. "This can't be happening," one of the residents murmured. But there it was, on the monitor, the change, the impossible. And it was there, in that instant, that something unexplainable happened. The alarm slowly faded, as if they had fulfilled their purpose of announcing the impossible. The room returned to its usual state, with the steady hum of machines and its dense silence, but something had changed. It wasn't just the numbers on the monitors or the medical charts, it was the atmosphere, as if the air itself had thickened, as if hope had started circulating again within the ICU walls. My daughter didn't wake up. Her eyes remained closed, her face serene, still pale, but she had responded. She moved. The doctors saw it. I saw it, and even if they tried to find a clinical explanation, something in each of their faces betrayed what they didn't dare say out loud. This wasn't expected. It wasn't predicted. It was, in their cautious terms, outside the norm. But in my heart, there was no room for technicalities. For me, this was a miracle. The medical team rotated in shifts, checking vital signs, adjusting medications, documenting everything. One of them, a young resident with honest eyes, approached me, clipboard in hand, wearing an expression of respect mixed with disbelief. "Mrs. Helena, your husband was right. There's been improvement. Small, but real. Her brainwaves are more active. It's not a conscious response yet, but the body is reacting to stimuli. That's not common after so many days." I nodded, trying to absorb each word like they were oxygen. He went on, "We'll continue with intensive observation. And I encourage you to keep speaking to her. Science still doesn't fully understand why, but there are cases where a familiar voice makes a difference." I looked at my daughter, the little girl I once saw take her first steps, who held my hand on her first day of school, who cried in my arms after her first heartbreak. Now, it was my voice she needed, to help her find the way back. I sat beside her again, held her hand, still cold, but more alive than ever, and began to speak. "Hey, my love, you heard me, didn't you? I knew you were still in there. I knew your soul was still fighting, even if your body was tired. You've always been like that, strong, even when no one expected it. And now it's just one more step. I'm here. We're here. You can come back." My eyes filled with tears again, but this time it was different. It wasn't pain. It was something else, something I barely recognized. It had been gone for so long. Hope. On the other side of the bed, he was silent, said nothing, but his gaze was fixed on her, as if trying to catch every tiny change, every shift in breathing. There was reverence in his eyes, almost a wordless plea for forgiveness, and for the first time, I didn't feel like pushing him away. I hadn't forgiven him. Not yet, but in that moment, I began to see what he had always tried to be, or what he thought he never could. Maybe it hadn't been just cowardice. Maybe it was fear of not knowing how to love properly. And I understood, even if painfully, that there are some wounds we only grasp when we see them from the outside, or from afar. Night fell quickly. The sky darkened like a heavy curtain dropping over a stage. Outside, the city kept moving. Horns, sirens, hurried footsteps. While inside, time felt suspended, stretched between what was and what still could be. A nurse came in, swapping the IV bags. The soft clinking of metal was oddly comforting now. She smiled gently and said, looking at me, she had a good day. For the first time, the vitals stayed consistent for hours. It's a good sign. I nodded in thanks. She left, and we stayed, the three of us, like a distorted portrait of what could have been a whole family, if time had been kinder. I used to dream about this, he said, after a long silence. The three of us, quiet, but together. I never imagined it would happen like this, around a hospital bed. His voice carried no preaching anymore, no messianic tone, just humanity and exhaustion. So much exhaustion. I used to dream too, I replied, but in my dream you stayed. You didn't disappear when things got hard. He nodded, his eyes still on our daughter's hand. If I could go back, I'd do everything differently, but maybe this is the chance to do at least one thing right, even if it's just to be here. I stayed silent. Maybe because in that moment, there wasn't anything left to say. Sometimes silence between two people is the most honest form of dialogue. The night deepened, and though we were both exhausted, neither of us slept. It was as if our bodies didn't want to miss a second of whatever was unfolding in that room. Each of her breaths was a breath of hope, each small change on the monitor, another thread stitched into the fragile fabric of faith. At one point, he stood up, walked to the glass window, and rested his forehead there for a few seconds. I saw his shoulders tremble. I don't know if it was from the cold, or tears, or silent prayer, maybe all of it at once. He returned and sat beside me again. This time, there were no walls between us, just a vacuum of unfinished stories, and a daughter who, even unconscious, seemed to unite us more than ever before. Then he asked, almost as if thinking out loud, "Do you think she knows we're here?" I looked at him, then looked at her. I think she does, but even if she doesn't, she feels it. And in that moment, for the first time in so many years, we looked at each other without anger. There was still pain, still a lot to be said, but in that brief meeting of eyes, there was also a truce, and maybe the slow birth of forgiveness. The early morning dragged on with the slow heaviness of moments when the heart weighs more than the body. The clock in the hallway read just past 3 a.m., but it felt like we'd lived a whole lifetime since sunset. Inside the ICU, the light was softer now, less merciless than during the day, and my daughter, lying there in her bed, looked at peace. The machines continued their steady vigil. Every heartbeat, every assisted breath, every small sign of reaction was being recorded. The improvements were small, almost shy, but constant, and that, in itself, was a miracle in the making. I stood to stretch, joints aching, shoulders stiff. I walked slowly to the water fountain in the hallway. The water was cold, metallic, but it went down well. When I returned, he was standing beside the bed, eyes fixed on our daughter's face, as if trying to memorize every feature. There was tenderness in his gaze, and something like shame, too. Maybe for all the moments he never got to live with her. "Do you want to step out? Get some air?" I asked on impulse without planning it. He looked at me, surprised, and nodded. We walked together to the end of the hall. The waiting room was empty, lit only by the warm glow of an old amber lamp. We sat side by side on a worn-out couch that was still surprisingly comfortable. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It was necessary, like we were both reorganizing inside what was left after the storm. He spoke first. "She's alive, inside. I can feel it, like part of her is trying to say it's not time to go yet." I looked at him, studying that face that, even aged, still felt familiar. Time had done its part, but what stood between us went far beyond wrinkles and gray hair. It was absence, the void he left behind. "You had no idea how much she cried for you," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "For years. And I didn't know what to say. I had to invent you. Did you know that? I had to create the father she needed, the father who wouldn't abandon his daughter without looking back." He lowered his head, his hands clenched in his lap, as if trying to hold the shame inside his own body. "I thought about her every day," he replied, "but I didn't know how to come back. After so long, I believed my presence would do more harm than good, so I stayed away even more. I prayed. I traveled with mission groups. I preached about second chances, and deep down, I knew I didn't have the courage to take one for myself." His words cut through me. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell him that preaching to strangers had never been more important than being there for his daughter. But another part, maybe the part tired of carrying so much anger, just listened. "I tried to be strong," I whispered, "but there are nights when the loneliness makes noise. And when she got sick the first time, when she had a panic attack and didn't want to tell me, I knew some part of her was still waiting for you, and that your absence had taken root deeper than I could reach." He rubbed his face, exhausted. "And now that she's between life and death, it's like everything has been brought forward. All our mistakes, all the words left unsaid. They're here, in this room, waiting for an answer." We fell silent again, but this time it was different. A silence that didn't divide, that united. As if finally, there was room for scars to meet. "Do you still love her?" I asked bluntly. "With everything I have," he answered. "I always have, even when I didn't deserve to." "And did you ever love me?" He took a while to answer, not because he didn't know, but because he felt the weight of the question. "Yes," he said at last. "I loved you with an intensity that scared me, but I was too immature to understand what it meant to sustain love when it stopped being easy, when it asked for permanence, sacrifice. I didn't know how to stay, so I ran, like so many do, but the fault was mine, all mine. I didn't expect those words, not that night, not in that cold corridor, with our daughter's life still hanging between wires and machines, but there they were, late, maybe, but honest. And that's when my eyes filled again. Only this time, I wasn't crying out of pain. "I tried to hate you," I admitted, "and for a long time I thought I had. But when I saw you kneeling beside our daughter, when I heard you pray, something in me cracked. I don't know if it's forgiveness. Not yet, but it's the beginning of something." He moved closer. He didn't touch me, but the act of leaning in, of just being there, was enough. "If she comes back, if she wakes up, I want her to see something good between us. Not a war, not a void." "She will come back," I said for the first time with conviction. "I can feel it now, in a way I didn't before." We sat there side by side, two people who once loved, who hurt each other, who lost themselves, now united by the life they created together, a life that might still teach us how to rebuild. That's when a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, but her signs are even more stable now, and one of her motor reflexes has returned. It's surprising." We stood up together, like we were being pulled by the same invisible thread. We looked at each other, And this time, there was something different in our eyes. Not just relief, something older, deeper. We embraced, not as a couple, but as two survivors. Two halves that, despite everything, still recognized a lost part in one another. And as we held each other, the nurse added with a quiet smile, "Your daughter is responding better than we ever expected." Dawn arrived with tenderness, as if even the sun had learned to respect what was happening in that room. Morning light passed through the ICU windows in soft beams, drawing golden lines across the white floor, breaking the sterility of the space. It was as if the day itself knew it needed to be gentle with us. After so many dark nights, I was sitting beside her, eyes fixed on her face. There was something different about that morning, not immediately visible, but something in the air had shifted. Her breathing, though still assisted, seemed more natural, her heartbeat steady, and most noticeably, her skin looked less pale. It had color. It had presence. He came in shortly after 6. He brought a cup of coffee and a familiar exhaustion in his face, but there was something new in his gaze, a calm we hadn't seen in days. He handed me the coffee without a word and sat beside me. We sat there, in silence, watching our daughter breathe. Then it happened. A movement. Small, but unmistakable. Her right eyelid twitched. I dropped the coffee cup. It hit the floor and spilled, and I didn't care. My heart raced. I leaned forward, calling her name softly, as if afraid to startle the miracle. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her eyelid fluttered again, this time for longer, and then her eyes began to open, slowly, like someone waking from a deep dream, or from a lifetime of silence. Her eyes were cloudy, unfocused, but they were there. "Love, it's me. Mommy's here." She blinked, tried to focus. Her pupils moved, trying to recognize the room. And then, in a fragile effort, her head turned just slightly toward me. "Dad," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I'm here," he said, kneeling beside the bed. "We're both here." She looked at us, with effort, but she looked. Tears welled from her eyes, and she cried, as if they carried days, months, maybe years of stored emotion. And in that moment, the three of us cried together. I held her hand. He caressed her hair. And for a few sacred minutes, nothing else existed but that silent reunion between a daughter who came back and two parents who, even if late, were there. Doctors came rushing in, summoned by the monitors. But when they saw the scene, they slowed. It was as if even the hospital was breathing easier. The exams began immediately. Reflexes, simple commands, stimuli. She responded, with her head, her eyes, a faint attempt at a smile despite her dry lips. The medical staff exchanged glances. Short phrases whispered, "It's remarkable. We weren't expecting this. She's lucid, neurologically stable." Then one of the doctors turned to us with a smile that mixed skepticism and awe. She surprised us. "Medicine doesn't have an exact explanation for what's happening, but she's back, back." That word echoed inside me like a prayer answered. In the days that followed, every small victory felt like defiance against fate. The movement of her fingers, her first full sentence, a smile without support from machines, a steady, focused gaze, full of life. She didn't remember everything. Some memories were cloudy, but the essential was intact. I remember the moment she asked us to sit beside her, side by side in the ICU lounge chair. It was that evening, when golden light streamed in through the window, casting a warm glow over her face. "I didn't dream of anything," she said, her voice weak but clear. "It was like being silent inside. But at some point I heard your voice, Mom. And yours too, Dad. And something pulled me back." She turned her head slowly, eyes glistening as she looked at both of us. "I know what I need to do now." The sentence lingered in the air, dense, mysterious, but full of intent. I wanted to ask what she meant, but something inside told me to wait. That time, that revelation, it belonged to her. Recovery was slow, as expected, but once again she surprised everyone. In less than a week, she was out of the ICU. In 2, she was walking with help, and by the end of the month, she was walking on her own, even if cautiously, relearning how to live, to eat, to laugh, to rediscover herself. And we, the parents' life had separated and pain had reunited, witnessing it all. At home, we set up a temporary room on the ground floor. She wanted her independence, but also our presence. Sometimes she'd call us just to talk. Other times, she'd stay in silence, listening to music, staring at the ceiling like she was contemplating something bigger. One night, strong enough to climb stairs again, she called us in. We sat together in the living room, she in the middle, us on either side. "I felt like I almost left," she said. "And it wasn't fear I felt. It was sadness. Sadness for not doing what I was born to do." "And what is that?" I asked. She smiled, a calm, steady smile, unlike any she'd ever shown before. "To bring hope to those who've lost their own." He teared up. So did I. Because that sentence, coming from her, wasn't just an answer. It was a calling, a purpose. I want to follow in my father's footsteps. But the father I saw here, the one who prayed for me, who stayed, and who helped me find my way back. He cried in silence. I held his hand, for the first time in years. Days later, She asked us to go with her to a church, not the one where he used to preach, a different one, small, quiet, but full of meaning. We arrived together, walked in side by side, and when she stood up and walked to the altar, unaided, with firm steps and eyes shining, I knew the cycle had turned. The miracle wasn't just surviving, it was finding faith again. It was discovering that rebuilding was still possible. It was watching my daughter be reborn, and with her, parts of myself I thought were long gone. It was realizing that, even after everything, a new path still waited for us. That morning felt different from the moment I opened my eyes. It wasn't just the clearer sky or the timid bird song slipping through the half-open window. It was the way the silence in the house breathed. A light silence, full of meaning, far from the heavy hush of the ICU. It was as if, finally, life was offering us a new breath. She came down the stairs on her own that day. I had gotten used to the cautious steps, the tapping of the walking stick in those first days. But now, she no longer needed it. Her feet hit the floor with certainty, and her eyes held a clarity I had never seen before, not even in childhood, not even in youth. It was a different kind of gaze. The look of someone who had come back from death knowing exactly what they wanted from life. We sat at the table, fresh coffee, sliced bread, carefully chosen fruit, a small ritual I'd learned to nurture since she came home, as if every simple meal was a reminder of what we almost lost. She smiled, that calm smile, full of purpose. "Today is the day," she said. "Are you sure?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She nodded, firm. "Yes, I've waited long enough." That same day, she would give her first public talk since the coma, but not as a patient, not as a victim. She had been invited to share her story at a youth gathering in a humble community, the kind without even a working mic. It was a casual invitation, made by a childhood friend, but for her, it marked something greater. It was the beginning of her new path. He showed up shortly after, carrying a bag with materials for the event, Bibles, pamphlets, a borrowed speaker. He looked excited, nervous, as if he were the one about to speak. And in a way, he was too, because that day, the three of us would stand together before a room of strangers, sharing what once had been pain, secrecy, and miracle, each of us owning our part of the story. On the way to the venue, the silence between us was peaceful. No more lingering questions, no more words left unsaid. Just the serenity of those who had survived the storm and were learning to walk again, feet still wet, but steady. The place was simple, a makeshift hall behind a tiny church, plastic chairs lined up, humble people, curious eyes. She stepped onto a small platform, just a wooden riser, with a table in the back, adjusted the mic with trembling hands, took a deep breath, and began. "My name is Ana Clara, and I was dead, not in the literal sense that headlines like to use, but inside. I was in silence, in shadows, and I was called back by two voices, my mother's and my father's." The room fell still. Everyone listened as if each word was a key opening hidden doors inside them. She told her story. Bravely, without embellishment. She spoke of the accident, the coma, the pain, but she also spoke of a happy childhood, a father's absence, a mother's strength, and the unlikely reunion that grew out of near tragedy. I came back because I realized my story still needed to be told. And because I understood that many people walk around dead inside without even knowing it. People who've lost faith, who've lost courage, who just need a breath. I want to be that breath, not because I'm special, but because I survived. And surviving is the most powerful form of hope there is. At the end, they stood and applauded her. People cried. Young people came forward to hug her. An older man asked her to come speak to the men of the community. A woman said that just hearing her voice made her want to reconnect with the son she hadn't spoken to in years. That night, I understood that the miracle we lived wasn't just ours. It was seed for other lives. From then on, the invitations kept coming, small ones at first. A school, a local radio, a women's shelter, but she accepted them all, with the same strength, the same conviction, and always saying, "If I could come back, so can you." And we stood by her, supporting, participating, learning that our role now was different. He and I didn't rekindle our relationship, and we didn't need to. The love that had returned between us was of a different kind, a love of rescue, of rebuilt friendship, of mutual respect. We spent time together, took care of her, laughed, talked about the lost years, and learned to live with the absences. There was a quiet understanding between us. The love we once had wouldn't return the same way, but it had transformed into something more stable, more silent, more solid, and that was enough. A few months later, she was invited to speak at a larger church in the capital, a full auditorium, cameras, people filming, sharing it live. That's when I realized her story wasn't just moving, it was powerful. At the end of that night, she hugged me tightly and said, "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have come back." Then she turned to him, waiting further back, emotional, and added, "And if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have believed the impossible still exists." That night symbolized who we had become, survivors learning to walk side by side, even with different scars. Today, she continues her journey, helping other young people, speaking about faith, about loss, about new beginnings, and we walk with her, because sometimes life leads us down dark paths just to show us how much light we still carry. And even after death, symbolic, emotional, or literal, there is always a new way forward. You just need the courage to take the first step. I don't know exactly when we stopped merely surviving and started living again. Maybe it was on an ordinary morning when I heard my daughter softly singing while organizing the bookshelf. Or maybe it was the day she told me, eyes sparkling, that she'd been invited to share her story at a national gathering. Or perhaps it was that moment, in the middle of a tight hug, when she whispered in my ear, "Mom, I finally found myself." The truth is, life doesn't mark the moments of our rebirth with flags. It offers us small signs, and it's up to us to notice them or not. Today, when I look back, everything seems almost unreal. The hospital, the machines, the looming loss, and then the reconnection, the miracle, the slow steps toward a new existence. With each memory, I feel like I've lived several lives in one, and maybe I really have. My daughter was reborn, but so were we, because it's not just those who fall into a coma who need to wake up. Sometimes those around them also fall asleep, in old pains, in accumulated resentments, in silences that grow like mold inside a home. We had to almost lose her to rediscover what was most essential in us: faith, forgiveness, the courage to try again. Today, she lives with purpose. She speaks to hundreds of people at events we never imagined attending. But the most beautiful thing is that she never lost her simplicity. She still cries when telling her story. She still calls me Mom, with that sweet tone of someone who knows every line of my face. She still calls her dad to share when something goes right, or when something goes wrong, and he, with teary eyes, still listens as if he's learning to be a father for the first time. They built a new relationship, not an idealized father and daughter, but two emotional survivors who chose to rebuild the bridge, one plank at a time. And to me, that is love in its most human form. As for the two of us, he and I, life found another name for what we once called marriage. We're not together like we were before, and maybe never will be again, but we have something rare: peace between us, companionship, memory without bitterness. And that's worth more than 1,000 forced fresh starts. Sometimes he drops by for coffee. Other times he calls just to check in. And on special occasions we sit at the same table, laugh at old stories, and silently give thanks for what still stands after the storm. And what remains? Faith, not the kind from rehearsed speeches, but the kind built on the edge of the abyss. The one that sprouts when logic no longer works, and science says there's nothing more we can do. That's where my true faith was born. Not in the moment of the miracle, but in the days leading up to it, when I kept believing without any guarantee. Listening remains, the ability to hear the other with an unguarded heart. I learned to listen to my daughter with renewed attention, to hear the silence of the man who once hurt me, and realize that, within that silence, there was pain too, and learning. Gratitude remains, for the second chance, for the opportunity to once again feel the warmth of her hand, to see her eyes shine in front of a crowd, to know that, despite everything, she's alive, and not just existing, but living with meaning. Legacy remains, because now, every time she steps on a stage, or holds a microphone in a shelter, or sits across from a wounded woman to say, "I understand you," something of the three of us is there. A part of our story breathes through her words, and memory remains. Yes, she still feels the after effects of what she lived through. Some scars are invisible. They show up in the distant look on quieter days, or in the tiredness that comes faster on certain mornings. But even those shadows are reminders that she came back from the darkness. And so, every small discomfort is also, paradoxically, a celebration of life. Sometimes, people ask me how we manage to forgive, how we manage to keep going, and I never know how to give a simple answer. The truth is, it wasn't a decision. It was a process. Forgiveness didn't come with a hug or a scripted phrase. It came in layers, in shared silences, in small gestures, in looks of recognition, in nights when we slept a little lighter. It came the way light enters on cloudy mornings, shy but steady. Today, each of us walks a little lighter. We know not all families are perfect, that many stories break halfway through, that sometimes pain comes from the ones we love most. But we also know that it's possible to write new endings, or at least new beginnings. Our story isn't a fairy tale. It doesn't have easy solutions or grand redemptions, but it has something few stories do: truth. And that truth, as harsh as it was, is what keeps us standing. When I look at my daughter, I see the woman she's become: resilient, clear-minded, empathetic, and I realize that the miracle we prayed for came in an even deeper form than we dared to dream. Because she didn't just come back to life, she came back transformed, with a mission, with her own light. And when I look at myself, I see a woman who was also reborn, who learned to love differently, who no longer needs to control everything to feel safe, who understands that some wounds don't heal with time, but with presence. As for him, I see a man who didn't run away again, who stayed, who listens, who holds space, who doesn't hide behind speeches, who prays with his feet on the ground, and who, even without the old structure, is still part of our home, of our core, of what holds us together. And finally, when I look around, I see something even more precious. Other people being touched by our story. Women who write to us saying they've decided to take a step toward reconciliation. Children who found their parents again. Parents who asked for forgiveness. People who began to believe once more that even in pain, hope can be planted. That's when I understand the true meaning of it all. Pain is never in vain when it becomes a bridge, and ours became one, in words, in hugs, in presence, in renewed faith, in open paths. And when my daughter speaks, in front of strangers, microphone in hand and heart exposed, I close my eyes for a moment and hear the voice that echoed back in that hospital room. Prepare yourself, she won't survive. And then I open my eyes. I see her, alive, standing, speaking, touching lives. And I smile, because the greatest miracle is what remains.